Hello, my name is Michael Lambert and I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. I've never worked for anybody else. I've started all sorts of small businesses and run them over the years in all sorts of different types of businesses. I've been involved in product development, in manufacturing, in wholesaling and in retailing. I've been an importer and an exporter. I have, for example, imported from China since the 1980s, and I've been exporting to the EU for at least 30 years. So I say all that just to make the point that I do know what I'm talking about when it comes to business and small business. And the reason I'm making this video is to explain the consequences for small businesses of Brexit. Now, we've had a lot of people, a lot of politicians telling us with great certainty about how good Brexit is going to be for the economy and for all of us. I think it's pretty clear right now that the whole thing is falling apart. But when you think about it, our lead negotiator was a guy who had spent his entire life as a diplomat. He was working on behalf of, well, he wasn't actually, because the first Prime Minister involved, Theresa May, had no experience of business whatsoever. Boris Johnson is famous for his quip about FUCK business. We have a cabinet of 21 members, of whom 18 have had no experience whatsoever of ever running a business. So basically, what is in effect a huge, huge trade deal, one of the biggest trade deals in the history ever of the world, conducted entirely by amateurs who were pandering to a lot of right-wing Tories who just wanted to sever all relations with the EU at any cost. But it's all a disaster, and I'm going to try and explain to you by way of a metaphor is just how disastrous it is, because we read a lot in the papers now about how the bureaucracy is, they told us how one of the reasons for Brexit was to get rid of all this Brussels bureaucracy. In fact, the amount of new bureaucracy imposed has been just overwhelming for many, many businesses. And we're hearing all the time in the press about how one business after another is struggling with the paperwork and how difficult it all is and how complicated it all is and how expensive it all is. Well, that is all true, of course, but if you're running a business and you have obstacles presented, like a lot of new bureaucracy and so on, you find ways of getting around that. You find ways in due course. In a few months, you find ways of automating everything, having it all on your computer so that you'll produce your export documentation all on the computer, as opposed to having to write things down. And you've got to register for this and register for that and register for the other things, but all that sort of stuff, we'll do it, that's no problem. So although it's a huge amount of extra work and inconvenience and expense for all businesses exporting, that really isn't the problem. And I want to just, as I say, I want to explain it by way of a metaphor what the real problem is and why Brexit is going to absolutely destroy our economy. And it is this: there are thousands of businesses all over Europe who for years and years and years now have been buying from British suppliers. And they've done so very easily. Place an order, goods are sent, pay for them. That's a process that they've just repeated hundreds of thousands, millions of times. Very easy for a British supplier until Brexit to supply a customer in Rome or in Palermo or in Copenhagen. No more difficult than supplying somebody in Chester or Birmingham. Exactly the same process: order, supply, payment. Now, of course, we've got all this extra documentation when exporting. But the problem is what effect all this has on the customer. Nobody even mentions about the customers, the European customers, and what they're going to have to do to go on buying from us. And so imagine this. There are, in this country, about 8 big supermarket chains on there. And we all buy from one or another pretty regularly. We've probably got our favourites, which we go to every week and so on. And all these supermarkets, they all compete. There's not a big difference between them. They're all selling the same products, more or less. They are all more or less the same price. They all compete fairly evenly, and they have the whole market really tied up. And everybody's happy. Now, supposing that one of the supermarkets said, we're going to do things differently. We've got such plans for the future. In 10 years' time, you'll be able to buy all sorts of things you could never get before. And because of deals we're hoping to do, there might be discounts. There might be discounts. So some cases where you were paying 2 or 3% duty, you wouldn't have to pay any at all, because we're getting free trade agreements in all these different countries all over the place, so that we can increase our range of products. But initially, there are going to be some changes, and these are the changes that you're going to have to get used to if you wish to go on dealing with us. When you get to the checkout, whether you've got a pint of milk, loaf of bread, or you've got £350 worth of groceries in your trolley, when you get to the checkout, you'll have to fill out a form. Now, to be honest, it's quite a complicated form, so you'll have to get an agent to fill it out for you, really, unless you pre-do it all on the internet before, but that'll mean that you have to know what you're going to buy and so on. So you'll have to get this form filled out before you get to the checkout. And then you'll have to pay duty on some of the items if they're not sourced in the EU, where we have a free trade agreement. So you'll have to pay some duty, I'm afraid. And it's true, we've already paid the duty, but nonetheless, you'll still have to pay it again. And you may have to show certain certificates of origin, which we will be able to provide you with at a small cost. And then when you've done that, you'll have to pay 20% of the value of your shopping for, as a deposit. And that you'll be able to claim back from the government in 3 months or 6 months' time, or whenever. Now, what I've described is what a customer in the EU is now faced with. Anyone buying from the UK has to, in some cases, pay duty, has to complete all the import documentation. They'll require an agent to do that. They have to pay VAT at 20%, or whatever the local VAT is, which they're not going to get back for 3 months. And on top of everything else, prices go up because transport companies are finding it quite complicated and more expensive to deal with all this bureaucracy. And the answer really is, as in the supermarket, you are just going to leave your trolley and never go back to that supermarket again. That will be the end of your dealing with that supermarket. You've got another 8 supermarkets you can buy from. In Europe, you've got another 20 companies, 27 countries you can buy from. So nobody as a customer is going to put up with all that inconvenience and bother and expense just to continue dealing with a British company. Why would they? Absolute madness. And as long as the government continues to maintain that everything's fine, nothing to worry about, Dominic Raab, another of our negotiators, has never had a day's business experience in his life, said how in 10 years' time it'll all be fine. Well, 10 years' time might be it. The whole thing is so badly thought through, so stupid, so short-sighted, so completely pie in the sky. Do you know, I had one of my businesses which I started in 1997, supplying customers in Europe with certain consumer goods. I did some designs for these consumer goods. I got the samples made in China, and when the samples came, I placed a small order, put the order when it came in the back of my car, drove over to Paris and opened up 10 or 15 accounts. I went back a month later, They all sold very well, opened another 10 or 15 accounts, and it was very easy, really easy. And within 5 years, we had 100 accounts in Amsterdam and in Brussels and Barcelona and Prague and Paris, and terrific potential. But the moment that Brexit went through, and it was clear it was going to go ahead, we just gave up. We just decided that's it. We cannot carry on. We explored every possible way of continuing, but short of relocating to the EU, which for a small business is frankly not viable, we had to finish. So we started selling off all our stock, and we got rid of quite a lot of it, and then COVID came along, and funnily enough, next week the local authorities are going to come and collect about £35,000 worth of stock at cost, and we're paying them £1,000 to take it to the local incinerator and burn it. So that's the effect upon Brexit for my small company, or one of my small companies. And I'm not alone. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses who are going to face the same problems. Anyone trying to sell, any small business trying to sell into Europe now, is wasting their time. If anyone asked me about setting up a business to sell to Europe, I'd say forget it. It'd be absolute madness. It's very sad, but the consequences for our economy are really, really dire. There's a lot more I'd like to say about this, and maybe if more than 2 or 3 people watch this, I'll make some other videos about just how difficult it is to run a business, how important business is, because politicians and a lot of people tend to think that business doesn't really matter. Like our Prime Minister, F-U-C-K business. Well, business is everything, because without prosperous businesses, you're not going to have any taxation, and without taxation, we're not going to have anything. And I'm afraid that's the way we're going. We're going to have less and less taxation coming in, less and less government spending, more and more taxes. It really is frightening. And one last thing I'll end with saying is this: that to build up a business takes a very long time. It's all about generating relationships and looking after your customer, and confidence between the two parties, and that can be destroyed overnight, as it was on the 31st of December 2020. So anyway, that's it for this piece, and I'd be interested to see if anyone has any comments. Thank you very much.